Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the Actual Magician, yes I am an actual magician, explains. And today we're going to be taking a look at an introduction to the grade system in Western Esotericism as mapped onto the Tree of Life. Now we saw in our previous video that we can make a map of creation in terms of the Tree of Life. We also looked at Kesheth and we looked at the Secret of Malkuth, so do have a look at the previous video, episode 5, if you want to go back over this. But today we're going to take a look at the Tree of Life, and I have an animation and a 10-minute explainer coming up for you where we explain about initiation and the grade system. Now, before I start, initiation is literally a beginning. Now, it's specifically used as a new beginning. So, for example, you might be initiated into the secrets of going out bowling or something like that and learn all of the mannerisms and the colloquialisms and the language that is specific to the bowling fraternity or a martial arts club or anything else that you are new to and has some form of community or communal language. And so initiation could also be into a tribal structure, even if that's a modern version of a tribal structure. And it is there to really recognize and to celebrate your coming of age or your entering into a new phase of your life. So it's very important that these things are marking important stages. Now, we've seen in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that we go through various grades, and grade literally means step. So we can look at different models and we can look at different maps, but they're always the same 10 sort of identified states that we can mark as what René Guénon calls signposts. He actually used the word in English because there wasn't a French equivalent word to really get what he was after, but the idea of there being significant signposts on our journey up the Tree of Life is very important. Now, the grades themselves are not just given, they're not just recognized, they have to be worked on, and it is a lifetime journey. Some of the grades can take maybe 10 to 15 years to actually work through, comprehend, integrate, and pass through. And we're going to take a look at these 10 most important stages in a little moment. And in my next video, in episode 7, we'll be looking at the alchemical stages that can be mapped through correspondence to these 10 grades themselves. So we'll be taking a look at the emerald tablet and the alchemical processes, looking at the stone of the WEIS being transmutated into the white stone or the perfect stone or gold, which is, as the alchemists say, aurum non nostrum vulgi. Our gold is not the gold of the common people, because it's a spiritual process, it's a magical process, it's a process of transmutation of the self and the self in relationship to the universe. Now, the 10 grades themselves are each marking a significant change of state, a state of awareness, and it's a very fundamental state, it's a transcendental state to the prior states, and that it totally replaces them with a new state that's above, beyond and around them. So it comprehends the state that you were in before. It's always a more consistent, comprehensive and congruent state of awareness and relationship to the universe, not a lesser one. Similarly, when these grades are attained, our fundamental identity shifts because the state of awareness has shifted. That cascades down to this state of identity, which in itself is a self-reflexive relationship to reality as we experience it, as we arise from it. And there are certain states where the rules and insights of a previous state are totally turned upside down or inside out. And these we can identify as being the fundamental state changes in the middle pillar on the tree of life when we map it. So these are our main, I guess, pit stops on the way. These are the bigger signposts, mainly because they are more fundamental to our shift of identity. And they're mapped on the middle pillar of the tree of life that we'll come to look at shortly. And in effect, there is a sense of something being true up until a certain grade, and Aleister Crowley has that in some of his writings where he says this is true up until the grade of Adeptus Minor or the grade of Magister Templari or so forth. There are certain things that we really believe are true that we have to hold as a true belief to function in the world and express our identity in the world and hold our identity in the world up until a particular grade. And then that can be fundamentally shifted, and we realise that that was a lesser, a smaller version of reality than the new one we've shifted into. And that comes with its own challenges, its own resources, and its own lessons, which again, I like to teach tarot right to beginners as challenge, resource, and lesson, because that then helps use the tarot as a language for the grade system itself. So why is it important to have a grade system? Well, it is important to know where you're going, and if you don't know where you're going, it's very useful to have a map. And in effect, this functions as a useful map. As experience tells us, and as other occult and esoteric writers sometimes tell us, the map is not necessarily linear. It's not necessarily a one step to here, then one step to here. Sometimes we sort of have to go back a little bit and recapitulate a grade work. There's something missing in order to get to the next stage and so forth. And this is why it's important, I feel, at least in the way I teach, to have a fairly fixed curriculum, a fairly straight way of recognizing the grades in the initiate and in oneself. And to some extent, the grades change the questions that we ask, the questions that a neophyte asks about the world. Can I summon demons, for example, or can I make a magical spell work? And not the same questions, or certainly they're not phrased the same way or seen the same way by, for example, an Adeptus Major. And we'll look at some of the differences in between those grades in a moment. So let's just take a quick look on the Tree of Life, and then I'll switch over to a nice animated version with a voiceover so I can really give you the core of each grade as we go up. But if we take a look, I'm just going to draw as a Tree of Life. So these would be our 10 grades, our 10 steps of the Tree of Life, but also they're more like signposts. So each of these is a sort of signpost pointing a certain way. So we don't actually inhabit these, we don't visit them. It's like if you're going on holiday and you're cycling there, or you're going by car, or you're walking somewhere, you don't stop to look at the signpost. The signposts are not what you are going to see. And the signposts are pointing the way to that. And so the Sephiroth and the grades themselves are only the pointers for the actual journey that's going on. And so each of these is a grade. And we have a fundamental state shift with the Veil of Paraketh, and with the Abyss, we have these fundamental state shifts from, I guess, an outer order, an inner order, and what we might call an upper order. And certainly up in these grades, the lessons, resources, and challenges get far more abstract because they're far more internalized, as we'll see when I do the animated trip up the Tree of Life with you. So each of these is a grade, is a step, a fundamental shift of awareness, and all of these you can do almost simultaneously, do the work of, have the experience of the grades, be initiated into them. But that is very, very different to working these 3 grades here. So these are off a set, these are off a set, and these are off a set. The sort of work being done up here is fundamentally incomprehensible to the sort of work that's being done down here, and so forth. But in a sense, all of the grades quit not Malkuth, and Kether is in Malkuth, and Malkuth is in Kether after another manner. So we do have this sense of we don't quit the work of any particular grade. In fact, Crowley said that once you cross the abyss, this fundamental state shift here, that you're almost thrown down into one of the lower grades in order to continue the teaching, particular to your own background, your own journey, your own society, your own time, and so forth, so that in a sense you maintain the state here, but you're actually expressing yourself through a lower state, through a smaller state to other people down here, in order to allow them to take the same journey and for you to mark their signposts as well and point them out. Because sometimes someone can be standing in front of a signpost and not be seeing it. They are knowing where they want to go, but they don't know how to get there, and so you just sometimes have to turn them around and keep pointing them at the signpost inside their own life, inside their own experience, because you can only initiate someone into themselves. You can't initiate them anywhere else. And so there is a sense of helping that person just realign themselves to the signals and the signposts that are around their life, and then they'll make the jump or the state shift into each of these. I'm reminded as well of a chemistry experiment that going on alchemy, I guess, that I did when I was at high school, and we had to measure the boiling of water with a thermometer, and the teacher tricked us by saying that he'd give a prize to the person who, or the little group that made the most accurate measurements. So we started measuring it and putting water on a Bunsen burner and taking thermometer measurements, and we started graphing the measurements of the temperature over time. So like this. So it started off at whatever room temperature was, say 13 or something. And we made a little mark, and then we measured it 10 seconds later as fast as we could, and we sort of measured it, and of course it was making a straight line. But then something weird happened just before 100 degrees. There was a weird little dip. There was a sort of strange little dip, only of about a degree or so. And so a lot of people, a lot of the groups, a lot of my fellow students sort of just corrected that and put it on the straight line. And our group and one of the other groups didn't. We had recorded it like that, so we thought, okay, well, we've not accurately recorded it. So, but that's what our experiment showed. And it is, in fact, a very notable thing in chemistry that before this state shift that happens here, because what happens here, of course, at about 98 point something degrees, is that the water transitions from a liquid to a gas. And to release the molecular bonds, to make that state transition between liquid and gas, between what we call water and steam, it has to draw some of the energy out in order to make that transition. And that's why the temperature drops, because the energy is actually not being wasted in the thing that we're measuring by the temperature. It's actually being utilized to make that massive state shift between liquid and gas. This really is what happens between the Sephiroth. Quite often, just before the major initiation, there's a huge dip that happens when someone feels as if they can't see the signpost, they don't know what they're doing anymore, they don't know if it's working, and so forth. And that is usually the moment that precedes the state change, the significant state change itself. And another thing that happens in between each of these grades is that one's life changes and shifts quite substantially, because you're looking at the world in a fundamentally, radically different way than you were in any of the previous grades. So each of these grades is very significant because it can change your life quite dramatically as a result of working out of a particular grade. And so we have to, again, be aware of that and prepare our lives around us, and also prepare the mind for some of these state changes. This is why we learn correspondences and the language of tarot and kabbalah and ritual, so that we can actually build a structure around this mystical and spiritual journey, even if we do lay that structure down once we've got to where we're going. It's very fundamental, because other parts of our so-called journey are actually state specific. So things like one's relationship to money, one's relationship to other people, one's relationship to your family upbringing, all of these things are part of the significant shifts that we have through our awareness and through our perception of them. And so we can't rely on those as being part of the true state of existence. So we build an artificial model through esotericism, through correspondences, in order to have the ladder up the journey that we can lay down when we get to where we're going, without necessarily having negative or major impacts on our life around us. So this allows us to do it in the most efficient and safe way, I guess, in order to make the journey up the tree successful. So now let's take a look at these 10 stages in a little bit more detail, so we know where we are on our own journey on the tree of life itself through the grade system of the Western Esoteric Initiatory System. So from being a neophyte, who is somebody who is not engaged in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System, we start the work of a zealotor, which is someone who starts to work and begins to practice. In effect, they can be practicing anything in particular, whether it be runes or divination or ritual or ceremony. But the fundamental question that they're asking is there more to life than this? Is there more than I can see? They're investigating the world, they're investigating the world around them through magical practice. This leads to the Theoricus grade, which is a far more psychological grade of self-examination. There's a particular form of self-observation that can be practiced here that leads to an increasing awareness of one's own psyche, psychology, and so forth. This immediately links us across to practicus. Once we have broken this grade, in effect, we then begin to practice all of the work again, but with a very different mindset, a very different perspective on who we are, what we are, and our relationship to the universe. We're now, in effect, working above the astral level. In a sense, we're working with the universe far more as it exists. And this begins quite a long practice. After the Theoricus grade, the practicus has to begin a lot of work that examines their own nature, the nature of the relationship that they have with the universe. And in effect, this is now the first of the paths that and Sephiroth that leave the middle pillar, so it's quite a dangerous place in a sense to get trapped in and lose hope in as well. But it's also the place where we have access to Tiferet and to Geborah, the Adeptus Major, Adeptus Minor on the Tree of Life. So we do have a very wider awareness of what's going on in the world around us. We then begin to cross the path that is attributed to the blasted tower on the Tree of Life. So here we begin to break down our previous notions. This is a long process of alchemical solution, as we'll look at in the next video. But this can take years of breaking down and building up new ways of looking at the universe through our experimentation, leading to the Philosopher's grade, one who waits, as I have it in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System. The Philosophers now begins to completely recant their ideas about what the universe means, what they mean, what the meaning of life is. It's a very, as it says, a philosophical grade of trying to understand what all of the magical work that you have done to date actually means for your own life, for the way the universe works, and for your relationship to that. In effect, this is along what's called a portal grade in the Golden Dawn. There's almost a subgrade within here where we eventually reach the Adeptus Minor grade. And this I've called One Who Begins Again, because this is our first fundamental shift of orders from the lower order into the outer order into the inner order of understanding. The Adeptus Minor relates to the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, and from that growth point there's a fundamental shift of one's fundamental identity, far more different to the Neophyte grade, the Zelator grade, and the Theoricus grade. Each of these is a fundamental shift of identity. Now the Adeptus Minor within Tiferet and in knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel has fundamentally shifted their work. We now make progress up the path of truth or justice, ma'at, in the ancient Egyptian cosmology, to become an Adeptus Major, one who works again. At this stage we begin to re-practice and reorientate all of our magical work towards a more mystical or spiritual attainment. If attainment is the right word, it's more of an unfolding. And again, we're going slightly out of balance here on the Tree of Life, so we have to be very, very careful and cautious in not falling back down the tree and ending up in our ego, in Yesod, in those ego processes, allowing those to grow and develop within the Adeptus Major grade itself. That practice again leads to a long period of new practice, of new methodology. In effect, you invent your own unique magical system, one that can be taught to other people. A new way of reading tarot, for example, or a new way of understanding ritual. And that is a fundamental shift. This leads us eventually to the Adeptus Exemptus, where we have to finally give away all of our attachments. We have to release ourselves from everything that attaches us to our previous sense of identity. And this is one who is free. Adeptus Exemptus means that you have exempted yourself from the internal and external attachments in order to make one goal, which is the crossing of the abyss. Now, you'll notice that there's no path for this, and that is because you are now free. You're even free of the model itself. There's no one or nowhere to guide you. Not even the angel can come with you across the abyss, which is why it's such a leap of faith into a negative existence, almost a dark place, a desert, a wasteland, an abyss, as it is drawn on the Tree of Life. And eventually this leads to the grade of Master of the Temple. Now, it's not that the adept or the initiate is now a Master of the Temple. It is now that the Master has returned to the temple and the initiate is no more. There is no sense of self-identity above Tiferet. And there is no sense of even identity above the abyss, because we are now in a state of unity that has transcended all of our previous notions of existence, identity, and relationship to the universe. We now make the fundamental, final, last crossing between the Master of the Temple and the Magus, which is the magician priest, which is our first sense of becoming an actual magician. There is a sense of a new relationship here. There's a sense of a new way of being that completely encompasses all of the prior grades. They're almost all wrapped up in the fool's bag on his stick, ready to make the final path, which is to the grade of ipsissimus, which means one's very own self. The God name of Keitha is actually Aiye, which means I am that I am, or existence is pure existence, or 0 equals 2. However we want to phrase this transcendental state of unity is impossible, because there is nothing to phrase it and there is no comparator from which it can be compared to have any form of identity at all. And this is our final step on the tree of life. You'll notice I've left the neophyte actually worded down at the bottom, because of course we remain a neophyte throughout the whole journey. We are always a neophyte to the next stage. We are always a neophyte within the stage, and we are always a neophyte to some extent from the stage prior, because now we understand it in a very different way, having reached a new state of awareness or a new way of being. And now we can actually apply the gold or the alchemical stone that we have attained at this point and touch it to all of the Sephira below us, all of the Sephiroth below us, in order to complete the lightning flash and recognize that it was our creation in the first place, that we are now in a state of unity that is part of the creative process and not responding to it or in relationship to it at all. And this leads us to the completion of the tree. But of course it could be that this is just the one tree within one of the Sephira, and so there is an idea that within each of the Sephiroth is its own grade. And so therefore, particularly at Adeptus Minor, we have to begin again working through the grades. So there's often a sense of going over old ground, having to learn previous lessons, which is why it is so important to have a good, clear curriculum for each individual student in order that they can attain the limits of each grade and eventually despair of those limits and automatically eject themselves in a way of exhaustion into the next grade, because you only learn where the answers aren't in order to learn where the answers might be. And this is each of those signposts that we have up the tree of life through the grade system. So thank you for watching episode 6 of the Actual Magician Explains, where we've covered the grade system, an introduction to the grade system of the Western Esoteric Initiatory System that I teach. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at the Emerald Tablet and the stages of alchemy as it applies to the initiation system, so we can get an idea of the sort of work, the challenges, the resources and the lessons that are appropriate, particularly to the lower grades on the Tree of Life as we take a look at them. So again, I will bid you farewell in the manner of our occult order, the Esoteric Order of Everlasting Day, which is the worker is hidden in the workshop. Thank you.